March 14, 1950. United States Capitol, Washington, D.C. Senator Edwin C. Johnson of Colorado stood before the Senate podium. The political atmosphere in America at that time was boiling. The Cold War was escalating. The fear of communism haunted the corridors of power. Amidst such a tense macro context, the highest legislative body of the United States of America dedicated its time to launch an attack on a single target, a 34-year-old woman of Swedish nationality, Ingrid Bergman. The congressional record of that day documented the chilling words. Johnson publicly called Bergman a powerful influence for evil. He labeled her an apostle of degradation, while concurrently charging her with spreading Hollywood's cult of free love. Not stopping at smearing her dignity, this politician also proposed an unprecedented bill. It was a demand that the U.S. Department of Commerce issue licenses to actors, aiming to censor their morality. Johnson even exerted pressure, demanding the immediate revocation of her passport. The entire machinery of a state was weaponized. They pointed their spearhead at an individual to execute a public civil execution. What was the truth of that heinous crime? No espionage, no treason. Ingrid Bergman's only crime was daring to break an unwritten moral contract. She had an affair. She became pregnant with the Italian director Roberto Rossellini on the set of Stromboli, while her divorce from her ex-husband Peter Lindstrom was not yet finalized. But the fatal stab did not only come from the Senate podium, it came from the judicial system. At the Los Angeles courthouse, the judge slammed his gavel, ruling to completely strip Bergman of physical custody over her 10-year-old biological daughter, Pia Lindstrom. Physical custody. Simply understood, in the name of the supremacy of the law, they blatantly stripped away the most basic and primal biological right, the right to embrace, live with, and nurture the very flesh and blood a mother birthed. Pia was stuck in America. All communication and letters between mother and daughter were strictly controlled. Bergman's exile in Italy officially began. This agonizing separation lasted for many long years, leaving an irreversible psychological trauma. Look at the hypocrisy of history. At that very same time, powerful men in Hollywood deceived their partners every single day. The likes of Clark Gable, Errol Flynn, or Spencer Tracy publicly maintained extramarital affairs. Errol Flynn even had to stand trial on charges of statutory rape. The outcome? The alliance of movie studios threw mountains of money to protect their leading men. The media turned a blind eye. The next morning, those men still calmly walked into their offices, smoked cigars, and signed million-dollar contracts. But for Ingrid Bergman, this double-standard system immediately activated its most brutal punishment protocol. Why did the elite react so extremely? Because her rebellion did not merely stop at the realm of ordinary moral violations. She committed the greatest taboo of the capitalist class, daring to smash the perfect glass cage they had poured millions of dollars into building. To understand the ferocity of the 1950 Purge campaign, we must travel back in time to 1939. That was the moment the seeds of manipulation began. Legendary producer David O. Selznick, the man behind the monument Gone with the Wind, brought Ingrid Bergman from Sweden to America to sign a contract with Selznick International Pictures. Her debut work was Intermezzo, a love story. When looking at Bergman, Selznick did not see a flesh-and-blood human being, with passions or complex psychological depths. Through the eyes of a seasoned capitalist tycoon, Selznick only saw an unexploited, pristine gold mine. Immediately, a brand positioning campaign was drawn out with the precision of a medical surgery. The entertainment industry of that era was thoroughly sick of flirtatious, heavily made-up, and scandal-ridden starlets. Selznick wanted to sell a much fresher commodity, absolute purity. He ordered the makeup department not to touch Bergman, banned plucking her eyebrows, banned changing her name to an Americanized stage name, banned heavy lipstick. The natural, Nordic healthy, and pious essence was meticulously packaged into a strategic commodity. The cage of illusion began to take shape, confining her life under the label of a saint. From Casablanca, 1942, with the hesitant role of Ilse Lund, sacrificing personal love for the greater good, to For Whom the Bell Tolls, 1943. But the pinnacle of this brand molding must be the work The Bells of St. Mary's, 1945. In the black and white habit of Sister Benedict, Bergman emerged as a symbol of absolute virtue, endurance, and selflessness. These works were not merely art films. They were perfect money-printing machines. The Bells of St. Mary's rose to become the highest-grossing film of 1945, bringing in over $21 million at the North American box office, a colossal figure at the time. The American public, always thirsting for a safe, saintly archetype to cling to and worship amidst the chaos of a world war, obediently emptied their wallets for this illusion. Bergman quickly became one of the highest-paid actresses in Hollywood, but more importantly, she brought an unprecedented return on investment, ROI, to the studio alliance. Return on investment, ROI, here, for every single dollar the corporate system threw into maintaining the Saint Media campaign, they immediately sucked back tens of dollars in direct profit from the middle class's appetite for conformity. However, commercial success in Hollywood always came with invisible chains. The more box office records she broke, the more Bergman's human rights were eradicated. The industrial machine had turned her into a form of intangible intellectual property. What is the core principle of asset management? An asset is not allowed to have emotions, not allowed to be tired, not allowed to possess trivial carnal desires, and absolutely not allowed to arbitrarily change the product packaging without the board of directors' permission. To bind her, they used the morals clause, a legal weapon pre-inserted into every studio system contract. It allowed studios to immediately fire, demand compensation from, and blacklist any actor whose behavior was shocking, offensive to public morals, or detrimental to the studio's commercial value. Ingrid Bergman in her 20s did not realize this cruelty. The brilliant halo that the media and the bosses draped over her was, in reality, a carefully tied noose. If she dared to step 1 foot out of the pious script they had pre-written, that noose would instantly tighten to the point of suffocation. 1948. Ingrid Bergman was standing at the absolute peak of the Hollywood fame pyramid. But behind the giant posters promoting the saint image, she was actually just a prisoner being squeezed dry. The clampdown didn't just come from the studio alliance. The most brutal prison was located right inside her own home, under the guise of a model marriage. Peter Lindstrom, Bergman's husband, started as a dentist and later became a neurosurgeon. He did not view her as a life partner. He viewed her as a clinical project that needed managing. Lindstrom positioned himself as Bergman's sole legal representative. He negotiated every contract, handpicked every script, and, most importantly, held absolute control over all cash flows. Economic abuse. Simply put, this is a vicious manipulation strategy by abusers, where the victim, despite directly generating millions of dollars with their own sweat and labor, is completely cut off from financial access, forced to beg for money just to maintain basic survival. And the truth was exactly that. The most profitable female star in America did not have an independent bank account. All colossal remunerations from the studios flowed straight into trust funds under Lindstrom's name. Every week, Bergman was handed a fixed pocket money allowance by her husband. When she wanted to buy a painting or a piece of furniture, she had to submit an invoice to get it approved. The industrial machine outside drained her artistic labor, while the family machine inside siphoned off all her material wealth. Artistically, the glass cage was also running out of oxygen. Film capitalists constantly forced her into meek, long-suffering roles. This stereotyping reached its peak in Joan of Arc, 1948, a project that consumed millions of dollars but failed miserably both commercially and critically. The boredom and the death of her soul began to erode Bergman's physical condition. She suffered from severe insomnia. She used alcohol to soothe her nervous breakdowns between densely packed filming schedules. Escape was inevitable. In the spring of 1948, after watching 2 masterpieces, Rome, Open City, and Paisan, of Italian neorealism, Bergman wrote a fateful letter to director Roberto Rossellini. The letter contained the passage, "If you need a Swedish actress who speaks English very well, and in Italian only knows ti amo, I love you, I am ready to come and make a film with you." The Hollywood system mocked this decision. They couldn't understand why their money-printing machine would reject lucrative contracts to fly to Stromboli. a barren volcanic island in Italy with no clean water, no luxury trailer for resting, and having to work with an amateur crew. But for Bergman, that ash-covered island was the only oxygen tank where she could breathe as a human being, a flesh-and-blood human being, with desires, with flaws, and with carnality. Spring of 1949, on the set of Stromboli, what was meant to happen, happened. She had an affair with Rossellini, and she became pregnant. February 1950. The boy Roberto Rossellini was born. This child did not bring peace like in the family's psychological dramas Hollywood often produced. His existence was the detonator that triggered the most fierce, systematic destruction process in the history of the entertainment industry. Luella Parsons, the gossip queen of the Hearst Corporation media empire, dropped an exclusive article exposing the pregnancy. Immediately, a consecutive attack network was established. The Production Code Administration, PCA, led by Joseph Breen, stepped in. Extremist religious groups, notably the Catholic Legion of Decency, publicly called for a boycott of any movie featuring Bergman. Newspapers that once praised her as a saint now scrambled to write headlines calling her a whore. Tens of thousands of insulting death threat letters were sent to studios and editorial offices. What was the reaction of the investors? RKO. Pictures, under the wing of billionaire Howard Hughes, was the entity holding the distribution rights for the film Stromboli in the U.S. Initially, the capitalist profiteering instinct awoke. Hughes launched a dirty advertising campaign, using taglines directly alluding to the affair to stimulate public curiosity. He wanted to turn Bergman's moral collapse into box office revenue, but they miscalculated. The wave of hatred from the American middle class spiraled out of control. When they realized the film risked taking a loss, RKO's attitude instantly shifted. Total economic blockade. Roughly understood, this is not a sentimental turning away by the audience, but an organized assassination process, where the elite use legal power and distribution networks to erase an individual's existence from all money-making platforms, forcing the victim into civil suicide. Howard Hughes cut off all contact. Other studios simultaneously tore up their contracts. The PR machine that once protected her against all rumors now completely evaporated, leaving her isolated amidst a hail of public bullets. Most despicably, this draining process was blatantly backed by the law. In court, Petter Lindstrom played the role of a pitiful, betrayed husband. With the support of patriarchal laws, he filed for divorce and easily won full custody of little Pia. Without stopping there, Lindstrom executed a legal sweep of her assets. Exploiting the fact that all accounts were under his name, he froze all of Bergman's assets in the U.S. The multi-million-dollar fortune that she had traded her health and freedom for over a decade vanished in an instant. The system had sent an incredibly clear message to all female actors in Hollywood. If you obediently act as a commodity, we will give you wealth. But if you dare demand human rights, we will strip you of everything from assets and honor to even the right to be a mother. Ingrid Bergman was now stuck in Italy, empty-handed, stripped of custody, becoming America's public enemy #1. She had to pay a flesh-and-blood price just to smash the illusory shell the capitalists had draped over her. But the cruelest tragedy didn't stop there, because they, those assassins in suits, had never given up on making money off her. 6 years. That was the period Ingrid Bergman was wiped from America's memory. From 1950 to 1956, her exile in Europe was not as romantic as neo-realist films depicted. The works she collaborated on with Roberto Rossellini during this period, such as Europa 51, 1952, or Journey to Italy, 1954, although later venerated by critics as artistic legacies, became disastrous box office bombs of their time. The global distribution network had slammed its doors shut. The American audience resolutely boycotted. Financial pressure weighed heavily on her shoulders. The marriage built on an escape also gradually cracked, under the strain of a harsh reality. Bergman once again stood on the brink of exhaustion, losing her direction. But the cinematic capitalists had never truly forgotten their money-printing machine. They were simply, coldly drawing a timeline, patiently waiting for the market's psychological dropping point. In 1956, 20th Century Fox approached Bergman with the project Anastasia. The film's plot told the story of a displaced woman with a questionable identity struggling to prove she was a Russian royal princess to reclaim recognition. This script was absolutely no coincidence. Buddy Adler, Fox's head of production at the time, had seen through a new profit equation. The industrial machine realized that the saint image was dead and could not be reused, but the image of the sinner yearning for redemption was an entirely new, lucrative commodity. History has proven that the public always loves to witness a downfall, but they are even more willing to pay to watch a play of resurrection. They decided to buy Bergman back at bottom price. To pave the way for her comeback, a massive PR media cleanup campaign was launched. The most disgusting test took place in January 1956 on the variety show The Ed Sullivan Show. Ed Sullivan, the most influential television mogul in America, personally flew to Europe to conduct an interview with Bergman. Afterwards, he returned, stood before the camera lens, looked straight at millions of American viewers, and asked them to send handwritten letters to the TV station to vote on whether she should be allowed back on screen. Commercialization of forgiveness. Simply put, the power system turned a citizen's basic right to work into an interactive TV game where the mob was granted the right to act as moral judges, while corporate bosses leisurely pocketed massive advertising revenues from record-breaking ratings. The survey was a resounding success. The American public, the very people who had demanded she be hanged 6 years prior, now yearned to play the role of merciful gods, opening their arms to welcome the stepchild back. Anastasia hit theaters and instantly became a phenomenon, raking in massive box office revenues. The climax of this hypocritical play took place on the night of March 27, 1957. At the RKO Santages Theater, the 29th Academy Awards took place. Ingrid Bergman's name was called for the Best Actress category. The entire auditorium, comprising the most powerful figures in Hollywood, stood up in a thunderous standing ovation. Cary Grant, her close co-star, stepped up to accept the award on her behalf. The media praised it as a moment of great healing, but from the perspective of financial receipts, it was merely a celebration by the peddlers of illusion. That award held absolutely no humanitarian value. It was cold-blooded proof that the system had successfully and entirely exploited the tragic life cycle of a human being. They squeezed her dry in her youth, blacklisted her when she yearned for freedom, and now they chewed on that very pain, packaging the humiliation into a commercial product to maximize profit margins in the most brutal way. 22 years after the slap at the Capitol, on April 19, 1972, Senator Charles H. Percy of Illinois formally stood before the U.S. Senate to read a statement of apology. He called the 1950 attack one of the worst stains on this legislative body, restoring her civil honor. But a belated apology recorded in the minutes could not erase the aftermath of the years she was stripped of her right to be a mother, forced to watch her daughter Pia grow up through censored letters. It could not compensate for the frozen fortune, and it certainly could not soothe the physical deterioration that was silently destroying her. Ingrid Bergman passed away in 1982, exactly on her 67th birthday, after a long battle with breast cancer. The world still remembers her through gleaming golden Oscar statues and Ilse Lund's radiant smile in the papers. But behind that great legacy, the historical truth still lies there, naked and sharp. The cinematic masterpiece we once praised was, in essence, just the macro crime scene of a legalized exploitation, a place where an artist yearning to live truthfully was chewed up and punished by the capitalist machine, and finally sold back to the public under the label of a perfect play of redemption.